Okay, so we're back working on the '66 Mustang. As you saw from the last video, I installed this trunk support in the car. So with the floor pan and rocker panel and cowl taken care of, I'm now working on this end of the car, rebuilding this. This area had all been rusted out, so I cut away pretty much all of this. In addition to being rusted, it was damaged by accidents. So I'm running into a couple little issues with this that I'll go ahead and document. Of course, I'm going to be installing new trunk floors. I have another one for that side. As of right now, I've just wire wheeled all the spot welds to expose them. I've done the same thing down here, over here, and also in the wheel well. So those spot welds are all exposed, also down here where the wheelhouse meets the drop-off. So this is all ready to drill out these spot welds. I'm just going to go ahead and go right through these with a drill bit, since that'll leave me a hole that I can do a plug weld to. And I'll probably put some more holes in there, because there's honestly a lot of gaps in here with the spot weld. So I'll probably drill a couple more holes just to give myself plenty of areas to spot weld, so that it'll be nice and sturdy. So other than that, that's the primary goal today, to at least get that side, if not the new trunk floor in there, at least get that side with the original trunk floor removed. I'm also working on this area on both sides of the car. So you can see where I had to kind of force this Dynacorn panel in there. I may have to modify these flanges a little bit more if the trunk floors aren't able to sit in as much as they should. I'll be breaking out the Ford tooling tail panel at some point to help me fit all this together. But one thing I did was I measured the distance from the outside of the frame rail here to the trunk floor drop off. So on this side, that was 4 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to make sure that I replicate that when I install the new trunk panel. Also, areas that you want to measure, like the from this upper flange here to here on the other side, 32 3/4 inches, and from the bottom side to the other bottom side, 31 inches. So I want to make sure that I duplicate those measurements. That'll ensure that everything goes back together square, the way it's supposed to be, and won't have any issues when I drop in the tank. I'm also going to go ahead and maybe measure from this flange to this one, but actually that probably won't do much good now, considering I've already installed this trunk support. But once I get those trunk floors in, and I really start to work on these tail panel extension areas, I'll also reinstall the trunk, so that once I'm putting this together, putting the tail panel back on, make sure that all that is fitting together the way it should. So another issue that I'm dealing with in that area is, like, this quarter is actually sitting up higher than it should be. Now I had to cut off this original flange because it was just too rusted out, but I'm gonna have to rebuild that, put a new flange there for the quarter panel extension piece to go to. But you can see that it's already pretty much at the level of the trunk floor. So this is about close to 1/2 inch higher than it should be, and that's kind of borne out by I put a level on this trunk support, and this is level, but I put a 6-foot level on top of the quarters, which is a perfectly acceptable place to ensure that you're level on the backside here. And this side shows that this driver's side is up higher than it should be. So I don't know if it was like this from the factory. These cars were known for having fairly loose tolerances because it was just regular old Joe putting it together, spot welding it together in the factory. It wasn't robots like they have today with the incredibly tight tolerances that they have. So I will have to work on this, figure out if there's any issues with how it's fitting together. But that's gonna require a little bit of care, and like I said, I'll have to reinstall the original trunk lid, or at least another trunk lid. I have another original trunk lid that I got for this car, because the trunk lid that is original to this car was a little bit damaged in the lock area. It was also rusted out in a couple places, so it needs to go, and I don't want to deal with a reproduction panel. So I just finished getting the old side trunk floor out. There was a bit of damage on the bottom side, which is also a result of the off-roading I mentioned before. You can see how it's bent along this area right here. Came out pretty easily. You can see what I was talking about with grinding through the spot welds. You just take a cut-off wheel and grind through the top metal, and once you start to see a little bit of discoloration, a little bit of separation in the layers there, you can tell when you're through the metal. And it makes quick work of it. It makes it pretty easy to remove these. It's a lot better than spot weld cutters, in my opinion. So right now I just got this sitting in place. Looks like it's going to fit pretty well. There is going to be a little bit of tweaking I'll have to do, like here at the back side. Like I'll probably have to do a relief cut in a couple of places and bend this flange a little bit further, just because it's kind of wedged in there. I'll probably, if I can't get a clamp on that up here, I'll probably use some sheet metal screws to help pull this area tight together. I've used that in other places. It's a really useful trick for pulling together sheet metal when a clamp just isn't really practical. So yeah, it looks like it's going to fit very well. This is CJ Classics brand. So I got I'm kind of curious as to where these are, who makes these for CJ. Sometimes these parts, well, you can see right there, it's got a Dynacorn part number. That's a Dynacorn part number for the trunk floor. And sometimes these parts will arrive in Dynacorn boxes with Dynacorn stickers. That was the case with this trunk support. This is a CJ Classics part that I ordered from CJ Pony Parts, and it came in a Dynacorn box with a Dynacorn sticker. These did not. They have a sticker. They have the CJ sticker on them, and they have the usual RDOT Taiwan stuff, just like this guy right there. So I don't know, these are kind of hit and miss. The sheet metal gauge might sometimes be a little bit thinner than the original, but we'll see how they work. For right now, I'm pretty happy with how this is going in. Of course, I'm going to have to, these are the original spot welds I drilled through. Of course, I'm going to have to clamp it down to the frame rail here, clamp it to the outer wheelhouse and all that stuff. And I'll try to make sure that everything's good with the quarter, that I'm not welding everything together tweaked. But I'm pretty happy with the way that's looking. I thought with that damage I was talking about on the passenger trunk floor, I was thinking that I was going to have to replace this bottom portion of the quarter, but I already hammered and dollied this area. It's not perfect, but it looks like this flange had been bent inward along with the trunk drop off, and it really looks like this isn't really going to have any problems going back into the proper shape with a new trunk floor. So hopefully I shouldn't have to mess with this. You can see I drilled through these spot welds right here, and then kind of used my air hammer to separate them. I'm probably not going to do that on the driver's side. I'm not really a huge fan of that method, just because I never can seem to drill through the spot welds perfectly like some people can. And when I hit it with that air hammer, it always seems to tear the metal that I want to keep. So it's just a big pain. I won't be using that method on the driver's side. When I get to that side, I'll just grind through the spot welds like I did. Some of them are difficult to get to, but I'll make do. It's better than this method. So there's still a little bit of the original metal from the trunk floor stuck to that. So I'll grind that down. I'll hammer and dolly that flat, and then I'll go ahead and start fitting it for good. So far, I'm pretty happy with how this is fitting. I'll have to Remember I mentioned the distance between that the frame rail and the trunk drop off. I'll have to measure that just to make sure that that's replicating the factory measurements. I'll go under here with the silver Sharpie, mark out the outline of the frame rail and drill for the plug welds, and then go from there. But as it is, I'm happy with the way this is looking. I don't know if I'll get it welded on today, but we'll see. All right. Okay, so I just about got the passenger trunk floor fitted. I may have to redo these a little bit just because the way I've worked the rest of it, there may end up being a gap right here. But that's no big deal. I'll just hammer and dolly these a little bit just to bring them back here, or maybe just clamp them. Who knows? But you can see where I made a relief cut right here, because before these bends were very soft. And there was also a little bit of excess material here that kind of prevented it from really being bent the way it needed to. So I made some cuts in here and in here that allowed me to reshape these flanges a little bit. Let's see. These trunk floors are supposed to be able to fit 65 through 70, which is why you have all this extra material here. You'd probably use all this if you were putting them on a 69 or a 70 car or something like that. But you can see what I'm dealing with here. This is pretty much where I need it to be. I'll make sure that I clamp it in the correct position before I do any welding. What I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to mark along here and trim off the excess material now. That way I can go ahead and come back, and especially down here, go ahead and just use my pneumatic punch to make holes in this, or I may just do it up here on the original panel. It's just a Harbor Freight tool. It's a pneumatic hole punch. You hook it up to your air hose, and it punches a nice little 1/4-inch hole, which I run a drill bit through it just to make it a little bit bigger for my plug welds, and it makes it much simpler than having to go through here and drill every single one of these holes for plug welds. The only real issue I'm dealing with is this flange right here that meets with the wheelhouse isn't really coming down as low as I need it to. Now, it is in a couple of places, like right here, you can see it, but it may come down in there a little bit better once I run some sheet metal screws through here to pull the trunk floor and the frame rail closer together for when I plug weld. But we'll see what happens. Also, right here, where the drop off meets the wheelhouse, there's this gap right here. Now, I'm thinking this is probably the way it was from the factory, because on the original trunk floor, on the drop off, you can see how this was bent inward. It was bent inward when it was spot welded, and it was like that. It was like that already. So I'm thinking that gap existed, and all I did was kind of like bring these together when they spot welded them, and it sort of created a bend in this trunk drop off. So what I'm probably gonna do is, and you can also see how it's a little bit offset right there where the wheel well meets the bottom of the quarter. So what I'm probably gonna do is just clamp this together and just weld it the way it is. Because this area isn't extremely structural. As long as I get it fitted correctly to the trunk support and the frame rails and the wheelhouse and out here, I'll be happy. I mean, I'm trying not to cut corners on this car, but sometimes you just get to a point where it's like, do I really want to go in here and try try spending who knows how many hours cutting and rewelding things to try to make things fit 100% flush. I mean, it's a restoration. It's not going to be 100% fit and finish like factory, but I'm going to try to get it to look as good as I can. But something like this, you're not really going to see it, and And this area will just get, this area is going to get stuffed with seam sealer anyway, so it's not really a huge deal. But another thing that tells you this is for other cars, like this thing here isn't used on 65, 66 to, as far as I know. It wasn't on the original drop-off, so not sure what I'll do with that. I'm sure there's probably like a plug or something you could put in that. If not, I might have to weld a patch in there or something like that. We'll see. But all things considered, it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty confident that I won't really have to patch this rear quarter like I was originally thinking. None of the rust it wasn't really rusted through anywhere. Just a couple small pinholes down here. Not really a big deal. I can just weld those up real quick. So hopefully the only rust I'll have to repair on this quarter is this area right here. But we'll see how it goes once I start actually running some sheet metal screws in here, tightening it down and clamping down everything. Already, if I clamp this area together, it comes together pretty nicely. So I may try to reshape this area right here, just where it's coming through. Easy way to reshape this is just take this flange right here, hammer that flat so that this is kind of sticking up, and then just put your dolly right about here, or like use some duckbill pliers or something to make some small bends in this area where you want it to meet this bend right here, and then just hammer and dolly it into position. Manipulating this metal is actually pretty easy. That's one of the things I've found out. It's not terribly difficult. I did already sort of hammer and dolly this flange a little bit because this also has a really much softer bend in it than factory. You can see the difference. This bend is much sharper. That's one of the things I noticed in general with these aftermarket panels is the bends are way softer than the original sheet metal. It was like that on the replacement quarter. It's like that on this. It's like that on just about everything. But it's coming together. I'll probably drag the new tail panel out here and mock that up before I actually really weld anything, just to make sure that everything's going together the way it should. Yep, but I'm going to keep working on this. It's getting kind of late, so I'm not sure if I'll get it welded on today. Probably not. But we'll go from here. Alright, at this point I'm probably going to call this good. So I've reshaped the flange here. I just made a mark of where I wanted it to be, so you can see it fits that edge much better. On this I can use my pneumatic hole punch to put some plug weld holes here, and I'll just hammer that flat as I go along. So this area needs to go just a little bit lower, but as I go along I can hammer this down with like a rubber mallet or something like that, just to keep it where I want it. But then again, this is also gonna probably go down just a little bit as I run some sheet metal screws through here to hold this against the frame rail while I weld it. So I may end up having to reshape that, but I'm not really too concerned. But this is looking good, nice and even with the back here. This back end of the quarter is more or less where I want it. This is all looking good. The same thing as I said with this earlier. I'll just have to deal with that as once I have it secured to the frame rail with some sheet metal screws, I'll see what this looks like, and then go from there. And yeah, I already told you what I'm going to do with that. No big deal. That'll be fine. So this is pretty much ready to go on as it is. So next step is to prep everything for welding. Go ahead and clean up the surfaces, get rid of any remaining old metal from the old parts, clean up the mating surfaces and everything like that. Drill my plug weld holes rather, and go from there. It's looking pretty good. Before I weld this on, I figure I should go ahead and show where I modified it. I didn't really have to modify it too heavily, so I had to sort of hammer this out a little bit. The marker is just places where I marked where it was touching or where there was a little bit more interference than I liked. So I made a series of relief cuts. I kept having to go a little deeper. So this is probably sticking out about that much further than it is now, because when it was sitting up against the wheel well, it was hitting in this, or the wheelhouse was sitting up in this, is hitting up against this, and there was a good gap right in this area. So it was hitting here and wasn't letting it slide up where it needed to be. So after taking care of this, it was also, there was a little bit of interference between here and the wheelhouse. So this is originally sticking out about, yeah, that much. So this I just hammered in a little bit just to help it to fit against the wheelhouse a little bit better. I already talked about the relief cuts I made in this area. This is where it welds to the trunk support. I cut that area because there was still a little bit too much material there. It wasn't really letting these flanges be as sharp as they should be. And this section right here, I changed this angle a little bit, or I changed where the bend was. The original bend was more right around here, and I hammered that flat like I was saying, then bent this a little bit with some duckbill pliers, and then used my hammer and dolly to shape it the way I wanted it, and it fits pretty well now. So don't expect these parts to go on with at least a little bit of fitting. That's just the way aftermarket parts are. It's nice to be able to have so many parts available for these cars. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean all this up, get rid of all that rust and the mating surfaces, clean up these frame rails. Beautifully clean, rust-free frame rails. And go from there. So it's getting dark and I'm gonna have to call it a night, but this is pretty much prepped for welding. I've put some Rust-Oleum black on here just for some rust prevention. What I'm gonna do is let this dry overnight. Then I'm going to set the floor on there. I've already prepped it, drilled all the plug welds. By morning time it'll be nice and dry. I'll set that on there, and I'll use my silver Sharpie to make a mark where each one of those plug weld holes lines up. And I'll just use the sanding disc on my angle grinder or on my die grinder to expose the bare metal underneath those spots. But when Ford put these together, it was pretty much bare metal. You can just barely see under the original where it met the frame rail. It was just bare metal under there. So I'm trying to do this a little bit better than factory. I mean, it wasn't really rusted out after 54 years of how the factory put it together, so should last another 50 years like this. So this is all taken care of. I'm just gonna wait for this to dry. Time to just clean up my tools, and I'll set this all up, do the sheet metal screws, and weld this up in the morning.